Gerard, how are you?
Dyl, I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Mate, it's absolute honour, pleasure and privilege to get one of the greatest of all time into the studio. This is a real treat for our listeners today and myself. I'm excited.
I'm an admirer of what you've built from scratch, so well done on that. And yeah, I'm rapt to be here.
Mate, it's that means a lot. It really does. Hey, big year so far already, 2024. We're just chatting off air before. It just feels like there's something popping up every left, right and centre at the moment.
I feel like the magnitude of footy has grown exponentially year on year, and it mirrors what happens elsewhere around the world. We live a very NFL, EPL cycle now, and the shockwaves in winning and losing are more immense than I've ever experienced before. And then there's a rush. Like, this is the longest season we're ever going to have, 30 weeks. If you played opening round and you played grand final, that's 30 weeks. That's going to allow for a lot of fluctuation, but it's not really how the modern cycle works. Is every game's a referendum. Judgment is absolutely cast. But then we also run straight to the end now. So 2 and 3, well, you're finished. What are you going to do in the trade period? Whoa. There's this whole period. Teams will evolve, and there's the demand for it as well as the need for it. So what teams are now is not what they'll be at the end, and that's both in terms of those who will succeed and fail.
It's hard to take a look on that too, because we know that, you know, no one even remembers the first 4 games at the end of the year, and even from a playing point of view, I remember the old adage was, you know, you don't get contracts handed out in rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They always come at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So much can happen, but it is hard, isn't it? Because like straight away you look at teams and players and things that are happening, and people want to write things off right away. Like Brisbane, even like a couple of weeks ago, we were like, "Fuck, they're dead." Sack Fagan. I don't know if people saying that, but I'm sure there was fans reacting, and it's just like such an emotional game.
It is.
It's hectic.
So I think the emotional stake in it plays a really big role, and then trying to recognise trends and extrapolate is a big part of it. But so I'm running a couple of theories. At the start of the year, it looked to me like Brisbane and Collingwood, for every imaginable reason, were behind. They were behind physically. They were behind maybe tactically. I'd say they were behind emotionally. They played one of the greatest grand finals ever, and then they were asked to start earlier than ever before. So it makes sense to me that there's a bit of a lag in them, and there's a lot of time to make that up. And the other part is, I think this is true for our veteran players, is they've been given the shortest lead time into a season, and they're looking at the longest journey they've ever embarked on. I think they've been behind. So we've had players, and maybe Tex Walker's the best example, who looked gone, but after 3 or 4 games, he now looks like Tex. We've had veterans injured. Collingwood's veterans, I think, were given gentlemen's hours across the pre-season to get to have them ready for the guts of the season, not for the first 4 weeks. So it doesn't that doesn't suit the ultimate rapid judgment, but I think there's a few realities there which will probably work themselves out by June. But the moderate approach is out of vogue at the moment.
It's huge. We spoke, or you just mentioned earlier, about that sort of the evolution of the game, and that, for lack of a better word, the Americanization. Like, you went over to the Super Bowl. I'm sure you obviously love your American sports and all those things that are happening over there. And to be honest, I'm a big fan of that too. I love the player's voice. I love the opinions. Like, Kane Cornes, yourself, all reporters, even, everything doing great jobs. Like, I think that is a lot of the game that happens, not just the things that happen on field. It's the stuff that actually carries you through the week, that gets you to the next game day. How have you found that from starting in the media to like where it is now? Obviously there's a big contrast, but where have you seen the biggest changes, do you think?
Yeah, so it has grown exponentially. And as you rightly point out, so when you go to the States, I think the radio row around the Super Bowl is the best possible example, I think, because it's absolutely enormous, huge warehouse space, exhibition centre filled with all the sports radio stations of America. And you walk in there during the breakfast shift, and it is just an assault on the senses, the wall of noise that hits you, because that's modern broadcasting. In a way, loudest voice wins. And if you look at the 2 preeminent figures right now, That's Pat McAfee and Stephen A. Smith. So the literal loudest voice with the biggest opinions, they are holding sway. So that's even in ESPN, that's an enormous change for where they have been in the past. So yeah, it's moved from a much smaller media, still with like the best part of Melbourne is footy. So Melbourne has always been footy obsessed, but it has grown in numbers and it has grown in intensity and it has grown in volume. And some of that is great and some of it comes at a cost. The great part is you get everything. So you've mentioned me and Kane side by side there. So we're about as far apart as you can be. I love what Kane does. I think he's a genius in some of the stuff that he thinks of and how to frame it. And then all the way at the other end, I imagine, is where I sit. So you can get all of that. That having that scope service the game, I think, is tremendous. But it does drive the game furiously. And I reckon the phenomenon right now is there's an awful lot of time talking about stuff that's not real, that we either impose on the game or extrapolate from the game, but none of it actually means anything. And it doesn't mean much within the clubs or within headquarters. And this is the best in the US, that I feel like the media and the sport are totally divided. Stephen A. Smith is not interviewing coaches or players, and I don't see a whole lot of the players and the coaches being asked about what Stephen A. Smith says either, which happens here all the time. So they're miles apart. And then there's the broadcasting of the game, which is a totally different space. And that's where I find my people, Joe Buck and Al Michaels and Jim Nance, and so all of that is there as well. So, and I guess that's the absolute extreme, and it does make for an extreme world.
Do you think that we'll get there? And if we will, what's going to help that? And do you want it to get there?
I think we will just naturally evolve by what suits us culturally and what the demand is for. And there is clear, like, we've got more TV shows than ever before this year with new ones on the scene, and there's more radio than ever before, and there's more podcasting than ever before. So the many and varied opinions on the game, we are at, I would call it saturation point, but that's not really the international example. There is not enough in the NFL, there's not enough in the EPL, and I suspect there will never be enough in the AFL. And the fact that you can pick and choose. So if you don't like stuff, just stay away from that stuff. Pick the stuff that suits the way that you like to follow the game. If you want to celebrate the game, there'll be this portion here. If you want to be really down on the game, there'll be that portion there, and sort of everything in between. So it will never get smaller than it is right now, and I suspect it still has room for growth.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think that's something I love about the digital side of things when you're talking about before of staying away and liking what you do. It's as someone who's in the digital sense, like, you don't seek out things that you don't like.
Yeah.
So, and I've always found that in TV and broadcasting, because you are on a more of a public channel, that you're getting people from all realm, that's where like a lot of that stuff happens, because you're sort of finding people that wouldn't necessarily listen to certain things. Anyway, that's means absolutely nothing to what we're talking about today.
But I do think if you're playing the game, or if you don't want to be engaged, you don't want to live the cycle. So I think Essendon last week lived the cycle of you're no good, you were never any good, and you'll never be any good. Well, none of that is real to Essendon. They had very specific problems to go and solve, which they built a plan to solve on the night, and they executed that plan really well. So that's their world. Our world is what they have been, what they are now, and what they will be. And there's no need for them to intersect. But my thing is, if you were a player at Essendon last week, you don't want to live any of the world that's going on out there. You've got to be absolutely razor focused on the coaching and the method and making sure that you make amends for what happened the previous week. And none of that outside stuff can help you.
Well, I think that to go one step further is like the fish rots at the top, right? And I've been at a club, a long time ago, that I think were heavily, heavily back in the day infiltrated by media. And you could say that they weren't, and they're obviously referring to Carlton. And it's hard, right, when you're in Melbourne and people are saying certain things about coaches and things need to change. And that was affecting the higher level so much that it seeped through the players, even though you don't want it to. Yep. And I think that I talk about this a little bit and had Isaac Smith on the podcast a month ago, and it just goes back to that fact of business, of footy clubs are like businesses. And if you have a really strong leadership in a CEO and a good board and good GMs and good directors of footy that really set those strong boundaries of what goes in and what doesn't. Like you look at Richmond with Damien Hardwick all those years ago, there was that decision to stay or go. They stayed. You look at Geelong and it seems like that's just a fortress that can't be broken, and those really strong clubs that just back each other versus when it does sort of seep through like you're talking about with others, it's really powerful. So I'd say that is the biggest thing that obviously media and clubs have. Like I don't think that media understand how much they really do seep into some places sometimes.
So I think stability is vital as long as it's not inertia.
Yes.
So you have to recognise when change is necessary. So I felt like the sensation has usually been is on the outside we'll shake the tree, and then if you bend, that's
Something's
on
happening.
you. But and as soon as we can tell that you're about to bend, it's on. But if you remain, there's a scene in Jurassic Park where the kids are behind the waterfall and the T-Rex is there, and if you move, you'll get munched. And I think clubs live that week routinely. If you flinch, the T-Rex will crunch you.
It's a really good analogy.
But if you're absolutely still and believe in what you're doing, you have to be right, but it will pass. And then you get to get on with your business. I do think, the impatience will take hold of the sport, and I don't think that will be imposed. I think you can feel that. So St Kilda were impatient, Essendon were impatient, and sort out change when it really wasn't. That was buckling to nothing.
Yeah.
They were making their own decisions for better or for worse, and they ultimately get judged for it. But they were going to seize their fortunes and not be stable, not worship at the altar of stability when they thought change was necessary. And then you get clubs who value stability above all else, who are right. And Carlton finally got to that point last year where what was happening within their environment was affecting every part. They played with consequence on their minds. Is this kick is going to have reverberations and they finally purged themselves of that because there was absolute stability at a time where the tradition of the club was to behead the coach.
Yeah, really cool. What, off the top of your head as well, and I know I didn't prepare for this today, but is there anything that stands out to you where maybe a good and bad case of that over the history of the game that you've seen, or one that stands out to you around sticking fat or making decisions versed on media?
So I think the two most celebrated are Geelong's review, which saved Mark Thompson, and Richmond's review, which saved Damien Hardwick. So they were, and it's not that they were run by Brian Cook and Brendan Gale. So if you truly had someone who was an outstanding leader and executive who could get to the bottom of the problems, identify them, and then work out whether change was necessary or whether the change within the environment could actually rectify whatever the impediments were. So I was thinking about this with the Bulldogs this week, is Geelong did their review in 2006. They stick with Mark Thompson. They're 2-3 the following season. And in the corner, they're going, we made the wrong decision. We actually did need change. And then it happens. And it happens with a 150-plus point win over Richmond, and they never look back and they win the flag. So if you don't identify whether change was needed or not, you would change course, and Geelong would never have had 7 and 9 because you have to strip it out and build it again. And then Richmond did the same, as understanding that Damien Hardwick was still the guy and you needed to change everything around him and ask him to change as well. So there was immense change, but you didn't change the key figure, and it grows into what it did. And then, the chip chopping of coaches, it really doesn't work. You have to pick your moment. Collingwood picked a really, they identified a moment where change was necessary, and instead of having it all leak away, they were able to revive what they had. They had the raw materials to be successful, but there were a whole lot of things that the club was enveloped in that they had to clear the way of. And when Craig McRae was appointed, we all assumed that they were going to spend a bit of time in the bottom 4 and then try to rebuild it and maybe have one more go while Pendlebury was still playing. And instead they go preliminary final premiership. So you have to know your own business and not be influenced by what we would all impose or extrapolate on the outside.
Sometimes things like that just make me realise too that, like, we actually have no fucking idea what's going on. I think we have like an idea of things, but then there's always the...
I think there are patterns. You can see history repeating. So I've forgotten your exact years, but Carlton removed Brett Ratton.
So that was the one that I was thinking of.
Yeah, because they liked the idea of Mick Malthouse.
Yeah.
Well, Mick Malthouse is a terrible fit for them, as it turns out. They weren't going to remove Ratton, if not for Malthouse.
And they were in a elimination final in... I think I remember this being a supporter at the time. It was my first year in the team, and they had an elimination final against West Coast that they just lost. I think the next week they were playing Geelong that they'd beat twice that year to then go in. So who knows?
And then they go on a cycle of sacking coaches until finally they find the right guy, the right circumstances and stability. But yeah, so I think sometimes you do know sometimes you could recognise what's going on, and I've seen this before, and if you're connected enough, you can understand the rationale of what's happening and then make your own judgments as to whether you think it's right or wrong, and these things all get borne out by results in sport, which is sort of the glory of it.
I can't imagine all the, like, there's twists and tales that you've entailed over these periods, like just reporting on some of these big things.
So I remember early days is Kevin Sheedy survived a board vote by one. So were they going with him or not? And there's say a 6-5 split in the board, and they continue on by one vote. Like, that's a hard... So that's the 90s. That's hard to rationalise again now, as that would be... I think that would be such a difficult circumstance. You don't want to coach in minority government, as it were, or even just with the one swing vote. So, yeah, as I look around the world, there's a study that the tenure of coaches in Aussie rules is the longest average tenure in professional sport internationally. So in EPL, it's shockingly short, and stuff happens in a matter of months, never mind. But in AFL, we do value longevity and stability. Sometimes I think to the point of paralysis. It's not always... I think we judge success by longevity, and sometimes I wonder whether it would actually be better if coaches moved around for their own, just to freshen things up and to see if they can build it again somewhere else. So that apart from the way that it happened, the Hardwick to Gold Coast thing makes all the sense in the world. Don't go right over the cliff
100%.
With the team and land at the bottom of the ravine. Is hand that on to somebody else and you go and chase the next challenge and the one after that. But yeah, so historically, longest average, I feel like that's going to tighten up in an age that will become more impatient.
I think that I can't remember who said this. It might have been reported by a few people, but it was thrown up in the air recently, I think, around coaches getting traded. Like, that could honestly really work. Like it could like, even you look at Luke Beveridge at the moment. Like, obviously he's a good coach. It's probably not working at the moment at the Bulldogs. Like, it doesn't mean he can't coach ever again. Like, there's other teams out there that could be fitted for that person right now. So
trade coaches and draft picks involved.
Literally.
So it does happen internationally.
Yeah.
So we've taken some steps down the player and personnel mobility path, but we're only toe in the water.
I love it. I love player movement. That's for me more excitement than the actual game at the moment.
So the ecosystem of that is, once you introduce some of it, you may as well go all the way. And I think one of the laments at the moment is it just takes so long to rebuild a list. Well, that's because we have so many restrictions around it. Is if you can trade in the middle of the year and then you can trade at the end of the year and fast track your fortunes. The next generation will do that. The next generation of recruiting staff and administrator, a few of them are in positions now, but they will have grown up watching all this from around the world. They'll have big ideas, and in 20 years' time, we'll be a long way progressed from where we are now.
It's incredible. It's a very, very, very interesting space, and I'm just really excited for the next wave of what's happening in not just sport, but in the digital media sense and then reporting, because that's going to fast track everything even more, which is really exciting. Speaking of modern digital media, you blew up over the break.
Yeah.
You trended. Did we ever get to the bottom of who was the GOAT? Was it Myers or Messi?
So I think, have you seen the movie Burn After Reading? Coen Brothers movie?
I haven't seen that one.
Just go and watch the last scene, right?
Yeah.
And the two government officials who have had a hand in this, one says to the other, so what did we learn? And he replies, "I don't know, sir." He goes, "We learned not to do it again."
Yeah.
He goes, "Yes, sir. I'm fucked if I know what we did." You go, yeah. So I feel like I didn't understand any of that. It's a good age check for me.
Yeah.
That's not really my world.
Yeah.
And so I've backed out of that world as a result.
It was, look, to be honest, I think you've since then handled it extremely. You're just about to have a laugh. That is the internet world. And I think for me, being in this, it's a constant fear when you're in there of becoming a meme or becoming something like that. And at the end of the day, it always comes around and becomes a positive because it's quite funny if you can see the light side of it. Yeah. But I always use this analogy. I know you're a film man, a movie man. I'm not sure if this is on the list, but have you ever seen 8 Mile?
Yep.
With Eminem.
Yep.
So you know that final rap battle? This is the way I live my life, by the way. Yep. So in that rap battle, Slim Shady, I think his name's Rabbit in the movie, he raps first at the end and basically disarms the next his like opponent by just saying everything out there and owning all of his faults, and then it's got nothing else to say at the end.
Yeah.
So I feel like in those scenarios, for anyone out there, listening and finding context to this, obviously there was a fake tweet.
Yep, dressed up as
a quote
and
from
looked
you.
very much like it's exactly how they're presented.
Yeah. That said that Messi, Myers was better than Messi or something.
Yeah, or he had the qualities of Messi.
Which, to be honest, this year aren't... That's not totally untrue. I've been very impressed with his game. And then found that and obviously tried to get it down. When did you end up, just on that, when did you end up sort of realising, okay, I can't beat this?
So it was confusing at the start. And so it happened at night.
Yeah.
And I got a couple of messages. It was the only reason I knew about it is because I got a couple of messages, and then you go, "Oh, right, that's confusing," and a little bit. You go, "Well, I'm not super happy to have my image presented like that." And then the next morning, it was funny. I got into the office the next morning, and there was an email that said, "Oh, finally, someone's realised this. This you are exactly right. He is Messi," and you go, "Oh my god," and then I made it messy.
Yeah.
Just by raising the point. I think I said on it, I don't know what to do about this other than it's not me. And then a bit of the red mist set in. And I think when you approach the world with a level of decency and respect, you usually you expect that to be reciprocated. And you go, no. And so it took me a little bit of a while to work out. I'm not in that world. It doesn't suit me. And then it just, as these things do, because it was funny, it took on a life of its own. And then, of course, Messi kicked the first goal of of the game. And so something that was entirely fictitious actually became a real thing.
Yeah.
So I was interested in that.
Yeah. It's a great lesson, though, not just in that, but just that's the internet. And that's like that. Yeah. It is really hard.
So it's not for me. So that was helpful to get to that point. So I'm approaching 50 and I go, okay, so that's a world for my kids.
I think though that what we, I think there's a missed opportunity here in which like we can start actually creating, it's very, like we could actually create some other ones and just get really a good PR storm going. It would be fucking hilarious. Like just to actually troll the trolls would be really good.
It's funny getting the advice from people going, well, you just don't react. And you go, I wonder how zen you would be if you were presented in this way with something that you hadn't said.
Yeah.
So, and I've watched it a few times since, as Adam Gilchrist had something in India, and that is you think ours is the Indian cricket world.
Yes, I saw that one.
Yeah, and Gilly had to point out, hey, whoa, that's not me, because in India it had gone crazy.
Yeah.
So that, in the way that was done, that could have happened to absolutely anyone. And mine was more, I should have recognised it as more playful, but there's a serious edge to that.
Of course. Well, you're
other
obviously
people can deal
proud
with
of your
later
work
on
as well, and you don't want to be misquoted. But it's I think you've once you realise you handled it very well. So
I enjoyed the players at the post-year celebrations.
Oh, that was fun.
And I was walking along in Adelaide. I've forgotten who I was walking with. And someone goes, hey, Gerard, delete the tweet. Full marks to you, mate. Full marks to you.
So good. Mate, where'd the passion for sport and footy come? Because take us back, you were writing for the Herald Sun with film and movie reviews?
Yep.
Was it sport? Like, how did that all come about in the beginning?
So always the ambition was sport. So like most of us, my passion comes from Dad, footy, cricket and racing. My earliest memories are going to the footy with Dad. And I vividly recall sitting at the footy one day with him, and he said to me, imagine if they paid you to be here. And I was young, and I can pinpoint everything to that moment, and so this is my dream job and has been since I was a teenager. So at the end of school, I was either going to do journalism or law. They were my two possibilities, and I got a cadetship at the Herald Sun before school results came out, and I'd started work the first week of January the following year. And wanted to get the full grounding in journalism before then trying to break into sport and pursue exactly what I'm doing, commentating and the like. So the Herald Sun program was great, as you would experience everything in the cadetships, from police rounds. You work midnight till dawn shift. I saw my first dead body on a Friday night when a body was hauled out of the Maribyrnong River that had been bowling balled. So 1, 2, 3 through the temple. And that was in the age of Alphonse Gangitano.
That was a Carlton crew.
Yeah. And so they had a broad experiences doing that. And then courts, the Weekly Times. I worked on the rural paper for a little while, sports results. And it was a great grounding because I am a believer, and this has been truer as the years go on, is sport entails all of that. It's business, it's politics, it's crime, it's courts, it's footy. So everything is then encapsulated in sport. So to have that grounding, I feel like has served me well. Always had an eye towards sport at the Herald Sun and worked extra shifts. And when I was writing different bits and pieces, I would intertwine sport into that. And then got an offer from Channel 10 to go and be their chief sports reporter, which was nothing that I'd always assumed I would just write and then try to chase beyond that. So, yeah, that's a really pivotal moment in my journey. And then I've gone 10, ABC, Fox, SEN. And I see myself referred to as a veteran broadcaster now. I still feel like I'm just young chasing it all, but it has been a while. It dates back to 93 now. So
wow,
yeah.
What were some of your fondest sort of memories coming through? I know them speak about the hit in Maribyrnong, but was there moments for you going like, yeah, shit, I'm pretty good at this, or the first time you sort of hit a nice little article that made you feel that was a calling?
So news writing was a bit different to feature writing. So, and there was an adrenaline with chasing news. So there was a night. Would have been before you were born, as a petrol tanker rolled over outside the glass house. So what was the old glass house? And I was on police rounds that night, and our office was on St Kilda Road, which was just there. And I beat the fire crews to the scene. And the scene was like the apocalypse, as this petrol truck had rolled over, blown out all the wall of the glass house. The road was on fire, the riverbank was on fire, and the river was on fire because the petrol was flowing down into the river. So news, like anything can happen at any time, and it's dramatic, and you're there writing the front page of the PM edition, and all you're doing is documenting what's happened, and talking to police and witnesses and that sort of thing. So very transactional. And then the opportunity to write comes along when I worked for Hit magazine and for the Sunday magazine when it was first introduced in the Sunday Herald Sun, long form writing. And that was where you sort of get a feel for, I've got a knack for the long form writing. So I had some great experiences, and probably if you choose a moment, I got taken to London to interview Steven Spielberg for Saving Private Ryan and wrote probably a 5 or 6 page feature. And then that feature actually got sold internationally because it was of a quality that people wanted to republish. So that was a bit of a moment where you go, okay, so I've got some skills on that front. And I always loved writing, and then I had the dream for commentating as well. So started to work on those skills to open up as many possibilities as possible.
It's incredible. My next question was going to be, what's like the written pieces that you're most proud of? And that doesn't have to be for accolades or anything, but just, you're proud of. But before we get to that, I wanted to just ask about Spielberg.
Yeah.
What was that like sitting down with
it
him?
was amazing because I was young.
Yeah.
So,
and had he, excuse my ignorance, but had he, at that stage, was he still as big as he is now? Or
he was probably bigger than he is now,
really,
to be honest. So that was really at the peak
of his powers.
Yeah, and that was where he finally won the Academy Award for Best Director. And so I was a child of Spielberg, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's me growing up. And so I'm guessing I was probably 21. And it was a big thing for the movie company to secure an hour with Spielberg for Australia. And then because we were the biggest selling paper in the country, the Herald Sun gets that. And then it was my beat. So over we go to do it. And it's a while ago now, and I've still got the recording somewhere.
Wow. Do you have like the little...
It would have been a mini disc, I reckon. I think we'd moved past the mini tape recorder to the mini disc, if I'm guessing. And I read... There were 2 biographies on Spielberg that I sort of read on the plane on the way over, and had a really clear idea of how I wanted to interview him, and then that's half the job, and then the next half is writing the piece. So I don't know what Spielberg would have made of a 21-year-old from Australia coming in, but he gave me his full attention, and you're in the hands of your subject in that moment as to whether they engage with you or not. And he did. And I remember he made the movie as an homage to his father, and they'd always had a strained relationship. And I recall tapping into that, and then all the technical aspects of it as well. So, yeah, and it gave me the material to write a really good piece, which is absolutely on him. So, yeah, whenever you're in a group and who's the most famous person you've met or whatever, I always feel like I'm a really good chance to win this.
It's a pretty good one. I just had a thought of an awesome podcast idea for you. Imagine, like, as you said before, having so many incredible experiences for your whole journey, and then you've got this recorded on some form of something. Imagine doing a series where you like use some of those recordings, but then also talk about it. Talk about some of the paper, like the articles and stuff that went with it as well.
I think I'd be terrified to put it on, and yet I'd be so curious to hear how our conversation went, and then to go back and read the piece in the aftermath.
That's what I mean. Do the piece like there's a way that you could do it all together. We should talk about this. Don't tell Hutchie. No, seriously. Okay, no, that's good. And in terms of other ones that sort of stand out to you,
I got to write the Black Caviar book.
Yep.
That's
pretty cool.
It feels like that's probably the most satisfying thing I've done in my career. Yeah. Wow. I often laugh with my wife, is I could be the person who went and hired a house in somewhere marvelous and just go and lock myself away and write for 4 months and come out with a book. It was such an immersive experience to do. I did it largely over one summer and wrote pretty well all day, every day to a schedule. And it was I had a plan for the book. It was a chapter a race. So it sort of made perfect sense on that front. And yeah, just going so deep into that and then coming out with something that's, 100,000 words or whatever it ended up being, was just so much fun. And to have done it in real time. So my rationale around it was typically these books get written years later and everyone's going back to the original source material. So what did people write about it? What did people say about it? But I'd been at these days. I'd lived them. I'd broadcast them. I had copious notes and all the stuff we did live on air. And you go, I know what each of these days were. So I wanted to document that almost in real time. And, so if you're writing a book about Phar Lap, you've got to go back to everybody else's material. But okay, this was my material. I was there, knew the people, saw that. So that was the bedrock to it. And I absolutely loved it. And working with the people, working with Peter Moody and Luke Knoll and then the owners who are dear friends. It was, I hope to write another book or books in the future, but you need time So if I disappear at some stage and go to the Amalfi Coast and lock myself away for 4 months and come out with something at the end of it, I rather love that idea.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. With the writing the book, did you, with Peter Moody and all those trainers, did you have to like get sort of stories off them, or was it more just a piece of what you've...
So it was a little bit of everything. At the start, I wrote the first part of it before then going to all those involved and essentially asking for their cooperation and permission to write the book. And they were a bit nervous about that because the career was still unfolding and no one wants to jinx these things in sport. But we sort of all found a nice middle ground as I would write to the end of Royal Ascot. And then they were able to share their thoughts in real time as well. So instead of going back in hindsight 5 years later and going, oh, which day was that again? I had all of this material in real time, and then they came on board with it. And then it was at the end, is Royal Ascot was a really confusing race, as that was the day where Nolan stopped riding and she stopped, and the story in behind that is, so there was a bit of she won at Royal Ascot, but there was a bit of shell shock in behind it, and sort of capturing each of them in the aftermath. Nobody really knew what had happened or why. And Pete fled to France almost immediately. And Luke Nolan got savaged by the English press for stopped riding. So it wasn't the joyful experience that it should have been. She won. She went to Royal Ascot. It was the crowning moment of her career. But it wasn't that. And then I was supposed to write essentially those chapters on the way home. And I rang the publisher and said, I don't have the story yet. It's going to take a few weeks for everyone to calm down and to be ready to say what happened. And Pete came back to Australia, and that was a couple of weeks later. We sat together at Caulfield, and he walked me through that she was injured and he didn't know whether to run her or not, and he was just crossing his fingers at the end. And then I rang Luke Nolan and said, can I take you for a coffee? I need to just nut this out. And he said, it'll have to be a beer and he said, I don't know what happened, so you'll be telling me what happened.
Wow.
And that on a really tight deadline at the end, and I've never quite felt pressure like that. But you go, if we don't get the full story and we publish the book, then by the time the book comes out, they're going to be ready to say what happened. Yeah. It's just in the shell shock of the aftermath they weren't ready. And yeah, it made for the drama at the end of it was pretty amazing, given that you're talking about the most dominant horse we'd had, unbeaten. Every time it ran, there was the assumption that she'd win, but there was this incredible drama at the climax of it at Royal Ascot, which just took a little while to tease out, get down, and then get onto the shelves.
So cool. Yeah, I can imagine that, like holding that information in a book and just waiting for it to
so the two aspects where I remember waiting on the information, I could literally feel the weight on my shoulder, the pressure of it. What am I going to do? And then once you've written it, waiting for it to be published and hoping that it doesn't get that was the chant. Nobody knew what had happened. Wow. And then hoping that no one else would say until we got the book on the shelves. So but such a privilege to be able to do that, as well as Dad sort of taught me what greatness in sport looks like, and to have the opportunity to document it like that was just a tremendous honour.
Oh, incredible, mate! You should be extremely proud of that. That's it's a fascinating. I haven't actually know the story or read the book, but it's already sort of sold me into it. So I'll make sure we have to check it out. I should have warned you on this one, but top 3 moments of calling. I know there's a lot of time to go in that sense as well, and something could arise that takes that place. But over your time in the game, what's your favourite sort of 3 calls that you've had?
Yeah, okay. So the first one is easy. So Kyle Chalmers won the 100 metres freestyle in Rio as I want to say a 17 or
16 or 17,
as a teenager. And it was a shock result. And it was a jinx event for Australian swimming. We'd had favourites over 20, 30, 40 years, and they'd all gone down in this event. I'd called in London, and James Magnuson got beaten by 1/100th of a second. And Cam McAvoy was our favoured 100-metre sprint swimmer, but it was Kyle Chalmers who produced it. So this is when you are working with great people. So Rob Woodhouse is as good an expert as I've worked in with any sport. So we're doing the swimming together. He's an Olympian himself. And in the semi-final, Chalmers is last at halfway and storms home and wins the semi. And so we have the day to think about this thing. There's something going on there. And by the time we get to the pool, Rob thinks that Chalmers can win. And here's why. So you're alert for it. So at the 50, he's 7th. He's in front of 1. And Kyle's dad is in the stands, and we spoke to him afterwards, and he said, my only thought is just don't come last. And then 25 seconds later, his son swam himself into folklore as he just mowed them down and came through. Like, doesn't really happen in swimming. Mm. And then because we had half an eye for him, we saw him coming. And that was, I think it was sort of mid-morning radio here. So the sweet spot when people are driving around, and a couple of hours, it was late at night there. They were 10 till midnight, the finals in Rio. And a couple of hours later, it sort of became clear that this was reverberating around, and that, yeah, there was the people had loved the call. They'd heard it before they'd seen it, which is the theatre of radio. And so that is a great. It's on Kyle's swim, and then you have the opportunity to do justice to what he did to convey it, the theatre of the mind, and then if you can get it right, to sort of help it soar. So that's the perfect fusion of what you're trying to do, I think. So that's probably my favourite. And then, like, it's so I'm so blessed with what I get to call. So I've called Super Bowls, 7 of them now, and I've called Mahomes winning from behind in 3 of them. I've called Brady winning and losing. But my first Super Bowl, so it was the first, I just moved to SEN. It was the second week I was on air, basically. So there was a little bit of, there's a bit invested in that moment as you try to make an impression with a new audience. And Tom Brady is playing against the Philadelphia Eagles. It's the wildest Super Bowl, highest scoring, like no punts or 1 punt for the whole game. Anyway, so the game is set up, Brady on the drive to win the game, and he gets strip sacked. And you never know what you're going to say in these moments. You just sort of reach for words and see what comes. And I've gone Brady bereft on the turf. He was just sitting there, body upright, legs across the ground, just cast and bereft on the turf. And that caught on internationally. And by the time I went to the next Super Bowl, Eagles fans had T-shirts made which had the silhouette of Brady sitting and bereft on the turf. And it was a thing. Bereft on the turf it was used in, I think it was the New York Times, as one of the punctuation moments of Brady's career, sort of leading up to this, and then what happened post is bereft on the turf. So that was pretty cool that there's a phrase which documents a moment which then becomes something internationally. So I've always, as well as being the first Super Bowl I'd been to and the first game I'd called, is to have that pinnacle moment which lasts. That's one that I've always been sort of happy with. And then there's so many, like, footy's the bread and butter, and Test cricket is just such a passion. Last year's grand final was spectacular, just in everything that happened in that game. But probably the one that resonates, particularly because it was a Collingwood-Carlton game late in the season. Jamie Elliott kicks the goal on the run, and Collingwood have closed like the Grim Reaper. That's just what comes. And then I've got this vision of Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Doom as the high priest digs in and rips the heart out and holds the flaming heart up. And Collingwood hold Carlton's heart in their hand right now. So that's where I am when that happens. And then again, it's the ripple effect in the aftermath where Collingwood people are all corresponding, and there's Grim Reaper cartoons that have been made with Carlton's heart in their hand. And you go, yeah. So the moments themselves, doing justice to the action and to the players, conveying it with the beautiful theatre of the mind that is radio, and then helping a moment either soar or last, those are probably the 3 that I would land with. But I've had enormous privilege to see so much more and call a lot.
That's absolutely fascinating to hear from yourself as well. And yeah, I must say, not that just because you're here today, but it's almost like that there is some form of poetry to it. Like, is the inspiration for you? I know you've been obviously doing this for a long time. You've got an immense talent, but as we know that without hard work and actually dedication to your craft, these things don't just come to fruition. Would you say, like, From someone who the English language doesn't come naturally.
Yeah.
Why are you laughing? It doesn't, when you said before about, you just go to these places, like if I was to do that, I'm not sure if it would actually make sense in what I'm saying. But do you think that comes to like reading or films or like where does the articulation come from, do you think?
So everyone does it differently, right? So this is just me, not anybody else. Mum was an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So words have always been important to me. And then in a way, you become a collector of words and phrases, and not in a sporting context. So I think the most important thing for me is to read stuff that's not sport, and to listen to stuff that's not sport. And so the language is a beautiful and broad thing. Why not use it? So you become a collector of words or phrases from all sorts of various places, and then they just catalogue in your mind. And then when you reach for something, it's either there or it's not. Sometimes you reach for it and go, that's exactly right. And sometimes 3 days later you go, that's what I should have said. You'll be driving along going, that's what I should have said when that happened. And so somewhere in there, that's the whole profession, is trying to have the right words at the right time. And that's why it will never get old, because the challenge is constant. You'll never master it. And then the ones that you don't get at the right moment, they torture you a little bit. And then the ones that you do get, you go, I finally, 2 years ago, I read this thing in a magazine about, and got to drop it into a piece of commentary there. So that's the word puzzle in that's as good as Wordle for me. So not a write down and collect phrases, but more just a mental catalogue of, that's an elegant word. We might be able to use that at some point when the right moment arrives, and then try not to jam it in, just if it just comes naturally to the moment. So,
That's my problem. I'm jamming. I like to jam. I find a new word and then just try and use it.
Yeah. So Gideon Haigh uses the language just magnificently.
Who's that, sorry?
Gideon Haigh.
Yep.
And more sophisticated than I could ever imagine. And I read some of his stuff and go, I've never even heard of that word. So somewhere in the middle there is just a collection of useful words and phrases that might present at the right time to have a variation and excitement in it.
Is that the advice, I suppose, for people listening that want to get into broadcast media or journalism or anything in our game, to just build that vocabulary?
Not really. It's find what works for you. So what you're doing works for you, and there's no point trying to be anybody else. Find your own voice, find your own style, and craft it, and then work to perfect it. You'll never perfect it, but work to perfect it. So that's how I feel about it. I don't feel. I think there are a few mechanical things that everyone should know and do, but the rest is find your own. Don't be a pale imitation of something else.
It's a really good point. It's a great point, actually. Who's some people that you're really admiring that are coming through? I think I sort of feel that we've had a great calling sort of catalogue of some really great people, including yourself, for a long time. Is there anyone that's sort of coming in that next brigade that you've taken a liking to? Yeah,
so I think this is one of the privileges you get, is you get to work with great people all the time. So you get to work with them when you're younger. And Stephen Quartermain had a huge influence on what I do. Is a lot of the preparation he used to do is virtually the preparation that I do now. So there are habits that you observe and go, that I really like the disciplines of that suits me, and you take those up. And then I've had the great privilege of calling with Hutto, who's a best mate, and Dwayne and Andy. I love calling with Matt Hill.
Yeah.
So Matt's he's sort of the international model of a master of many sports, and I think it's great that his voice is heard across rowing at the Olympics and footy across the season, and it's there every Saturday and Wednesday at the races. And that's sort of the Bill Collins model, as Bill was so much more than just a race caller. So I love that that's opened up to Matt, and I get to call with him once a week. And there's terrific talent everywhere. And you need it to replenish and refresh, and the industry needs it because it's expanding. Fox will call their own games next year, so there's going to be more gigs television, and that will lead to more gigs radio, so you need to replenish with callers along the way. So yeah, it's such a I always say to anyone who says they want to do it, you go, well, you do it. Like, it's the best thing in the world. So dedicate yourself to it, work at it, and give yourself a chance, and then see where it takes you.
Hardest sport to call, and your favourite sport. Favourite sport.
So I think horse racing is technically the most difficult sport to call, because if you're calling it Flemington, they're a long way away over at the 1400, and you're using high-powered binoculars, which you can't shake and it's colours to horses, and the peculiarity of, you'll have a horse named Electric Blue, but its colours are yellow and green. You go, oh, that's just unfair. I think technically the most difficult, and I do think that's why our callers are incredibly revered historically and have been for generations. And then my favourite, footy and cricket are my two favourite things. They couldn't be more different. Is a test match lasts for 5 days and 8 hours a day. It's this incredible journey, and it's a conversation punctuated by moments of action. And Aussie Rules is just this gloriously constant, chaotic game which can take you in any direction. And the worst game can have the best highlight. So the mark of the year can be taken at the absolute pit of the worst game, and uplifting. So you have to be there for that. So the two bedrock sports, and my guilty pleasure is the Super Bowl. Like, I would love to do a season of NFL. It's not really practical or possible, but it'd be so good to travel around America across 18 weeks and do a game in different cities. And it's a terrific sport to call. I hadn't realised, I hadn't listened to NFL on the radio until I was preparing to do it for the first time. I'd always watched on telly, but it's a beautiful radio sport. The sound of it, the march down the field, the visuals, because it's much more like cricket than it is Aussie Rules. Is quarterback takes the ball, so he's the bowler, and he's either doing this, or this. And so it's a stop-start sport, but the moments of action are just so high. So yeah, I love them all. And people ask, what's your favourite sport? It's the one that I'm in right now would be my favourite.
That's a good answer, because you have to be so present, like not even just watching sport, but if you're commentating and staying amongst all those bits and pieces, it's absolutely hectic. Before we move on, I'd love to know just your favourite players over your journey in football. Yeah. Aussie Rules that you've been able to commentate. Like, who do you think's been able to really captivate you?
Yeah, so Buddy Franklin was the best player to call.
Yeah.
I think by a margin. And it sort of owed a little bit to how I grew up. So I grew up watching Gary Ablett Sr., where anything was possible. And Buddy had that air about him as well, as when he was playing. Well, with Ablett Sr., not only could you see the best thing you'd ever, and the most outrageous thing, then he would go and knock somebody out and he'd be out for the next. So there was like the scope of what Gary Ablett Sr. might give you in a day of the footy. And I saw a lot of his games like that. That was a lot. Franklin was a little more refined than that, but he could give you those moments. When the ball went in his area, you needed to be on. You needed to be aware. It's like the twitch fibers are going. It's what's he about to do? And he had that night. I was calling the Friday night where he kicked the two best goals I've ever seen 5 minutes apart.
Against
the
Essendon?
win against Essendon and Cale Hooker, and we know those stories. And the second one was better than the first. And so we got those two. It's like you wait a lifetime for a miracle, and we had two in 5 minutes. It was incredible. And I was calling with Peter Schwab and David Parkin, and the second one, it was even better than the first. And Schwab goes, it's just unbelievable. And I was going, that's it. It was just unbelievable that would happen and that we would see it and it would happen 5 minutes apart. So Buddy just oozed that quality. Is it could happen if the ball went near. And you spent the whole game hoping the ball would go near him. And everyone who's called him would feel they had those moments. As Hutto's catalogue with Buddy's 13, awesome, and Bruce has got the hurdle at the MCG. So,
that's my favourite moment.
So I feel like everyone's got them with him. But he was so Cyril had his thing and Gary Ablett Jr. had his thing, but Buddy had right, we're on here. Anything could happen. And it was almost disappointing when it didn't.
The hurdle at the Collingwood game was easily one of my favourite moments ever watching footy. I think that was at the time when I was just like, what the fuck? Like that,
Yeah.
This guy is just not human. It's
and then Eddie
incredible.
Betts had that.
Oh, yeah.
He was the other one who
Especially
had
at
the goal
Adelaide.
kicking quality.
Yeah, Adelaide Oval,
Yeah.
and he just kept kicking these miraculous goals. Just going back to the Gary Ablett senior, I wasn't really around, born when he was sort of dominating, but I was hearing some crazy things the other day about just him as a person pre-game and like just that sort of laxy, like that relaxedness of like heading into a game. Apparently like finish a meat pie on the way out to a game and just like roll out, do his thing. I didn't know he got sacked from Hawthorn by Alan Jeans before actually going to Geelong as well. Like I would love to see like a 30 for 30 on Gary Ablett.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating.
And it's vexed and troubled in the aftermath as well. So it's his football days aren't as pure and joyful as they were when you're experiencing them growing up. And then when he retired and Pyramid collapsed in Geelong, it's the intersection of all of it is incredible. And he wasn't an elite athlete, but I think he's the most freakishly gifted player to ever play the game. And his sort of his religious beliefs had him pleading guilty at tribunals in cases that they thought they were fighting, and so it's all over the place. But there was I remember. It's probably all on YouTube now, but for a while there was a bootleg VHS going around of Gary Ablett senior highlights, sort of the off-Broadway stuff, not the ones that you would see on whenever we put Gary Ablett on. There's 15 highlights and we all know them, and what more can you say? Sitting on the turf with the fingers up. So we know all of those ones, but there was this bootleg VHS and it goes for about 40 minutes and it's got, and you go, I was there that day. I remember that day against St Kilda down at Geelong, and it's amazing. And that's why, so in the conversation of who's the greatest player ever, you go, I saw so much of Gary Ablett Senior's career, it's not even a contest. But, there are those who saw much more of Lee Matthews or Wayne Carey, and that's totally fine. But Lee used to have a saying that was Gary Ablett on his best day, Gary Ablett on his standard day was Buddy Franklin on his best day.
Wow.
And that always chimed with me. And then Buddy's career went on. But you go, we would see something 3 times a game, which was just off the wall. So that, and there'll be Geelong supporters listening just who've seen this video and know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's probably on YouTube now, but I like the idea of it being, it would get handed around like a porno at school. This is a Gary Ablett VHS. I can't wait to
take this home and have some fun. That's great. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Hey, AFL 360 seems like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Do you love your time doing that?
Yeah. God, how lucky to.
How many?
So that dates back to
season?
2010.
15th season this year?
Yeah. Yep. So, and we've been the nightly show since 2012. So we started off as a Wednesday. We were given half a season in 2010 to pilot an idea around sort of a halfway media show. 2 journos, nothing in common in life other than footy, stage conversation around the game, track how things were playing out through the media, origins of stories, that sort of thing. And then we did enough in that 2010 season to get the 2011 season, and then Fox Footy resumed, as it was in hiatus in that period, and it resumed, and we were lucky enough to be chosen as the nightly show. So, yeah, and there's been... the first iteration of Fox Footy had Clinton Gribus hosting White Line Fever. So the nightly show is an important documentation of everything that's happened. And we get a lot of correspondence from people in Queensland and Sydney who this is their lifeline to footy, is to know they're not living it day to day like we do in Melbourne, but this is right, what happened today. And our sort of thing was, if it happened, we'll have it for you. And then there's a discussion piece around it. And then you go through years like the Essendon supplement saga, and some of those nights really mattered.
Full on.
The big tribunal nights when the whole football world is invested on which way this is going. Big nights, coach sackings, enormous nights. They're sort of the punctuation pieces that they matter more than others. The night that Jimmy Steins passes away, and so there's an absolute privilege to be the nightly show to document all of that, and that Robbo and I have been able to do it for so long. And we still love doing it. That's the, and we sort of have that man. Do the good stuff well. Is the standard nights we're just talking footy, but do the big stuff well.
How has the show evolved over the years? So did you guys know each other? Was it through,
No.
you just came together?
They put us together. So the original idea was that I would moderate two people who had nothing in common in life other than footy. And then we quickly realised if that was going to be Robbo, then I was already that. So you could have two against one, or just go with a two-handed show, which is pretty rare in television to have the two-hander. And then the bones of the show, when we went nightly, the bones of the show were well built. Monday night was coaches' night, Tuesday night was players' night, Wednesday night was sort of the old Stooges show. They went a bit Kingy and McClure. And that has evolved, as for a long time we had two coaches who were just out of it, or then we had Bomber when he was coaching, we had Paul Roos when he was coaching, and then the deal with the Players Association, so that they all cycle through. And then the players, we had Bob Murphy and Brad Sewell, and then Bob and Jordan, and then Jack Revolt came in, and now we're slightly broader. We sort of have 7 or 8 regulars who take it in turns, and then Wednesday nights has sort of evolved to the 2 panels, one the really highly technical of the watch list with Lee Montagna and David King, who see the game better than anybody, and then sort of a bit more of the bit grittier with Jack and Jordan, and that sort of owes a little bit to King and McClure at the start, and just the stuff that you can't measure, but the stuff that you feel inside the 4 walls. What would it feel like in those moments? So I think the bones of the show have always served it well. And given there's a finite number of things to talk about in footy across a week, but it gave the capacity to revisit the 6 things, always with different and fresh voices. So the same topic would last all week, but you would work in and out of this is how it looks to the coaches, and this is how it looks to the players, and then this is how it looks to the experts, which I think has been sound. And then the show's job is essentially to keep the news cycle moving, to keep the discussion piece moving. So this is all that's happened today, and then we present this as tonight, and then that fuels into the next day so people can react to that. And doing morning radio, I sort of live that cycle now. You go, right, that's really interesting. That'll be a great talking point for people tomorrow. And then for someone like Nathan Buckley this morning, that's going to be a good talking point tonight, and sort of in and out of it like that.
Yeah, it's really crazy how it works, like that news cycle of being, because you obviously do breakfast into the night as well, so you've got to go through the whole day holding on to certain things, and things can change so quickly.
Yeah, so a lot of I like living that cycle. So I'm 9 till 12 radio, and then on the drive home you're thinking, or you're talking to Tim Hodges as our long-term producer. He's done it as long as we have. And we now know how each other thinks. And so you check in and goes, this is where we are. And then 4 o'clock, we're in the office and checking this is what's happened over the last 3 hours. And then Tim just does he's masterful in the way that he puts it all together for us. So then I present the show, and then Robbo reacts to it, as that's the...
do you know what's going to sort of... Do you know where to poke and prod with him?
Yeah, a little bit, but it's hard
Do you ever sometimes just never know what he's going to say?
Oh, yeah. I think he doesn't know what he's going to say.
I don't think he does sometimes.
So, no, that's the... So what we don't do is rehearse it.
Yeah.
And that's
great.
Yeah, so our point of difference from the start, for better or for worse, and this is the way the show was constructed, was that we wouldn't have any of the conversations till we got on air together. And so you get the rawest version of it. Now, sometimes you go, could we have done a more refined version of that conversation? Yes, but it wouldn't have been as energetic or rough. So sometimes you drive it into the gravel and you drag it out of the gravel.
My favourite show was when Robbo rocked up like 10 minutes late last.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy that as much as you did.
Well, what's that like, starting a show out?
That was weird.
Yeah.
That was weird, especially because he had warned that we'd prefaced the bloody thing happening. I won't be here one night. You know, what do you imagine I will do when you're not here? Well, we'll talk to ourselves for a while.
Perception versus reality, Robert. Like, is he exactly how he is on air? Is that like so. He's quite similar.
Yep. I think, and we couldn't be more dissimilar. We both have a passion for footy and a passion for media. But other than that, I'm and he jokes about it. I'm married with 3 kids and in bed as early as possible. He probably lives the other end of the clock. That'd be reasonable to say.
Yeah.
Maybe, well, in the past, he's probably been a smoker and a drinker, and I might be a little bit less so like that. So we are the.
It's great to have
polar
differing
opposites.
opinions, though. You need it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work if you're disagreeing with things.
I think that's, the authentic conversation around what's happening in the game, that's what we've aimed for, unrehearsed, unvarnished, but based in the fact that you need to know what's going on. So that's sort of part of the journalism ethos. You've got to know what's going on and then bring that to the table and then have the competition of ideas. And that's what happens at every bar, at every boardroom, at every tuck shop. This is what footy means to us. Is you want to have a conversation around footy, let's go. And so that's the theory of it every night.
100%. And then on the other contrast of that, obviously, SEN and congratulations on the new deal.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. I would have, back in the day, there's nothing better than a big, nice, juicy deal that I'm assuming that's well deserved, mind you, because of the market share.
What was the longest contract you got?
About 1 year.
Right.
Yeah, 12 months. Yeah, they keep you on your toes, those ones. Yeah, so you might get a bit complacent now with yours.
Bit of security.
Yeah. Security's not good. You need to stay on edge. Obviously, the journey there and the relationship with that station and your audience is obviously very special to you. What does that mean to sort of sign on again with them, and obviously with Hutchie as well as the big head honcho?
Yeah, so I get to do that under my own name, which is really attractive. And the show is exactly the way I had wanted it to be. We've been very true to that. So I'm a big believer. It's like every show should have its different personality. The worst thing that can happen is if everyone's doing the same thing
shit.
from the same so the idea was to build a show like, at the time, Neil Mitchell and John Fane, this is what matters in Melbourne today. Well, this is what matters in sport today. And to have a theatre where it's worthy of the serious conversation that some people want to have.
Yep.
And those inside the game, administrators, coaches, players, you want to have a serious conversation around what sport is, what it means to us, how it's playing out, and the issues around it, then this is the space for that. So this is 7 years, and I find it every day. It's just invigorating. What are the things that matter in sport today, and then gather the best people around you. So gather David King and Nathan Buckley and Luke Hodge and Brenton Sanderson and Phil Davis, and then have great conversations around it, and then add everyone who wants to participate into it, either through text or call as well. And there'll be people who approach the sport from my demeanour, and then those who don't. And so you can either participate in it, or you can sort of live in fear of it. It's neither bother me, but we're not going to tailor that conversation to match, because there'll be something else that matches that earlier or later. So this is the show that we want to do. I find it invigorating every day, and you end up, you talk to great people all the time, and reinforce what sport is to us and means to us, and where it's taking us, and where it should be going. Yeah,
it's really interesting you're talking, like, referring to the Neil Mitchell sort of essence of like the sport side of things. When I finished footy, I worked in radio at 3RW for about 6 months, and I was working on like Tom Elliott's show. I was working with Dee Dunleavy when she had the afternoon shift, and I remember working in radio, the importance of that 9-8, like that slot, to not only set the agenda for the day, but then to set the audience up for the rest of the day and the agendas and all those bits and pieces too. So the cattle of like what that show is not just a show in itself. It's actually, the essence of the radio station, and then sets the rest of the shows up off the back of it, which is really cool when you look at the business of radio as well.
And then if you've got the right people, it can fuel. So Michael Christian comes on yesterday, just in this example, the MRO, and explains the difference between Matt Crouch and Zach Butters.
Yep.
Okay, so we're debating that all day long anyway. So best to have the actual explanation. You don't have to agree with it, but best to have the actual explanation so that we can all dig around in the margins. And we are splitting hairs in the game, but the game is about splitting hairs. So I've got my view on that, but then Dwayne has his view on that. and then Andy and Gazy have their view on that, and then last night Chris Scott has his view on that, and so you inform the debate with this is why the decision was made, and then you debate it. But it's not. If you don't have the essence of why is the decision being made, then we're all sort of we're all throwing rocks at each other.
You're just saying the same.
You've got to have. So that's get the source material and then let the debate rage. You don't have to agree with it. And people are angry about it. Great.
Yeah.
But it needs to be said what it was so that we can all have a proper and informed debate.
Yeah. I don't think you think about it until you actually know what's happening behind the scenes to actually set up these arguments. With SEN as well, obviously big things happening there, and it's a very big juggernaut, big inspiration for what we're doing, to be completely honest, in a digital sense. You guys are killing it with how it's all going. What's the evolution? Like we were talking before actually way back at the start about the growth of digital media and the Americanization of sport. I need to find a better word for that actually now that you're in here. I'm realizing my vocabulary really isn't up to scratch. But where is SEN heading? I know that the SEN Sync is coming now as well. Like what can we find on that platform?
Yeah, so the digital side of the business that's where all the energy has been invested because that's where everyone will migrate as time goes on. And SEN Sync sort of feels like this is the product that we've waited, the advancement that we've waited a long time for. So the eternal, can I get the radio commentary to marry up with the TV pictures? And everyone's been doing it manually, and you either succeed or you give up. Or this will do it for you. So at home, we've got the Sonos bar, connect the app through the phone into the Sonos bar, and you've got the pictures of Seven or KO, an automatic sync up where the work is essentially done in the background for you, and then it's there.
So you put it on your phone?
Yep.
And then sync it up to a platform?
Right through a speaker.
Wow.
And then and the work is done in the background to make sure that marries up with the pictures that you're watching either, and you've got the choice of Seven or KO. So that, and on the premise of choice is find what suits you. That's an alternative. That's an add-on that hasn't been there.
And that's
before.
ready to go now.
That's been rolling since opening round.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So we gently introduced it in opening round, just let people find it as they found it, while the tech was being refined. And now, it's there on the app for every game that we're in venue for, and it's got I think it's got an immediate following, and it's just in the interests of choice. It's just an alternative to what else is going on.
We need it, and that's what we said before. But like around this side of things, that the more, and I think we've got to stop looking at things as competitors and whatnot. As much as there's good people out there, like more people doing good things actually just creates a higher standard of product, and this is exactly what we need to make sure everyone stays on their toes. Which is
the next iteration of it, which I think is about to be unfurled, is SEN Stadium. So for a while there, we had the Wi-Fi product in Stadium, but the Wi-Fi's in Stadium is unreliable. So our tech masters have solved that. And very shortly, you'll be able to go and with your phone and your AirPods, you'll be able to listen to SEN Stadium with no delay. Not running through the stadium's Wi-Fi. It'll be direct to your phone. Now, the how I've had this explained to me, and it's just a fraction lost on me. But it's the two eternal questions: that how can I listen in the stadium, and how can I sync the TV to the radio? And the Boffins have managed to solve that.
It's fantastic.
In one season.
There you go. SEN Sync app. We'll have to make sure that's in the show notes. I was actually to download it on iOS or Android, whatever you use. I was actually chatting to Joel Brooks late last year, I think, and he's a fantastic guy. I think one thing that I've been really impressed with SEN, and actually would love to ask you about this, is how good and how important producers are. And I know Darcy here, fantastic producer, but with what you guys are doing, obviously having access to a lot of production in your team. The question the statement I was saying before, the question was, I would love to do something, and we're actually going to be doing it this year, where, as we were saying before, in terms of choice and doing different things, I want to just do like the Manning sort of call. Instead of it actually being commentary, just sit there, talk shit. Someone takes a screamer, we'll talk about that. But besides that, we're just talking, crap about the game. So
I think there's great scope for that.
Yeah.
And I noticed they'd signed a massive extension to manning the simulcast at ESPN this week. And well, they should have. And just choose what you want.
Yeah.
This is the...
There's times and place, right? If you're watching Gold Coast Giants on a Sunday, you probably want to just chill out and listen to something that's a bit less formal. But if you listen to a primetime game, well, you want to be hearing the emotion and the voice of the commentary because that's what you need. So I think there's time and a place for everything.
And then your observation around producers is that that's the great truism, is find yourself a great producer and form a partnership and live with them for life.
What's your relationship like with, obviously you're saying Tim Hodges before?
Tim Hodges,
so Tim's 360. He's at 360. And then who produces?
Ross Flegeltorp, who's a long timer at SEN. He goes back to the origins. And he's been with me almost from the outset. Is Jay Mueller, who's a great man.
Jay Mueller?
Yeah. He was my foundation producer.
Jay's one of the best in the business.
Yeah,
he's now at Triple M, I think.
Yeah, he's been in and out of the AFL and Triple M. And so we did 6 months together, and great bones to build around, someone who knows radio so well. Joel Brooks is just outstanding. Ben Lyon. Yep. And so you owe each other a debt of loyalty and gratitude.
Yeah.
And you are in each other's hands. So all of the work that the producer is doing is then the host's responsibility to deliver on. Yeah. And then once you're on air, you're entirely in the hands of the producer as to if there's stuff going on. So it's I value that relationship so much. And there's I think everybody who works in it for long enough knows that. Just find yourself a great producer and stay with them for life. They're such important relationships.
Can you just give, for people out there that might not know the role of a producer and what they actually do, like pre-meeting you'd have a show to set up, obviously what's on the agenda, but behind the scenes, once you're on radio, they're making calls, they're trying to lock in Michael Christian, they're on the phone trying to get good callers. Like what else are they sort of doing?
Yeah, sort of everything.
Yeah.
Is the show planning and the requests, structure. So I always think sort of meld your best ideas, as many ideas as you can together. So the conversation piece around what did you say on the weekend? What did you think of this? And the more ideas, the better. And then the mechanics of the show are absolutely in their hands. Is taking talk back, getting guests as stories are developing, cutting audio, which is a big part. As Nathan Murphy retires today, so you got to get that audio from Collingwood, and then the press conference, so you can flavour the show. You can keep coming back to the major story of the day, and then have the right people to talk about the right subjects on the fly, as well as the ones that you can plan in advance. So Tim and Ross and Joel would all be working for today, for the week, and for the month. You have to have the short, medium, and long term on the go all at once. And the pressure around either the 3 hours of the hour or the broadcast is there's so much work on the way into it, and then a lot to be done on the way out of it as well. So, I would think it would be an invigorating and exciting thing to do, and then it would have its absolute moments. There are just some times where you have to deliver a result. I'll talk for the next 7 minutes on air. You got to go and get a result. So at the end of that 7 minutes, this is what we're doing. So go get them.
It's I didn't have as high stakes as that, but I remember one day when I was at 3AW in my short stint that there was a guy who had the biggest matchbox collection in Canberra, and they really wanted to talk to this guy, and it was my task to go through Facebook and find this guy that had the matchbox collection. And I find it got him, I nearly got done for stalking, because it was just so weird how I'd stalked his profile to get his number. Actually, ended up calling his wife, got his number. And they're like, why the fuck do you actually want to talk to us on air? It's like, I don't know. Yes. But this is just what I've been told, and I need to deliver on this. So
it's the chase.
Yeah, it's
the chase.
I'm sure they're calling more important people.
A young producer I worked with got us Tom Brady in my first year on SEN. And he goes, that's a project.
It's so hard,
I'm
right?
Get this.
You think that it's not possible, but so many people would think that's impossible, so they're not going to do it.
And to get one, you have to have a go at 60.
Yeah.
So you have to have the energy. You got to live the thrill of the chase.
Unbelievable. Gerard, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I honestly can't thank you enough for everything today. But just to finish, I'd love to just briefly, if you'd like to, go through your top 3 films for us to finish off.
Right. So I'm not terribly sophisticated in this, right?
No, that's fine. It can be,
So my favourite movie of all time is The Empire Strikes Back.
Yep.
So I'm a child of Star Wars. That's my childhood.
Do you like Dune? Have you seen Dune?
Yeah, yes.
That's like the modern sort of...
Yeah, I just couldn't quite grasp it as well as I would have liked to. I haven't got to the second one yet.
Okay. Well, talk to me then.
Okay. So Empire Strikes Back is actually the first movie I went to at the cinema.
That's cool.
I remember Mum taking me, and my son loves Star Wars now as well. So it's just a joy. The scene where Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker come together does it for me.
Yeah.
Casablanca.
Yep.
The best of the classics, I think. And so much of that movie, if you go back and watch it, there'll be 15 things you go, oh, right, that's where it comes from. Is that it's just absorbed into
culture,
real life. Yeah. Into language, into pop culture. It all emanates from Casablanca. And you go, so the joy of rediscovering that. And I'll watch that once a year. And then I love Inception. And I can watch that. If that's on, I can dip into that at any point that it's up to. And the other movie that falls into that category for the time being is I thought Maverick was an absolute masterpiece in terms of if I'm on a plane with time to kill, I can watch 20 minutes of it. I can watch 40 minutes of it. If it's on, I can just dip into it and watch the next half hour of it. It just knew exactly how to wink and nod at itself. And again, as someone who sort of grew up with Top Gun, that's quite genius. But so that's my guilty pleasure of the moment. But I think I would go Empire Strikes Back, Casablanca, and Inception.
I have a pet peeve at the moment with Netflix. I think that back in the day, if you were lucky enough to have Foxtel, what the best thing was is the movie would already be playing. Yeah. So you could just dip in and you just end up watching it. Yeah. Whereas now I just scroll because I'm like, I don't want to really start that. But if it was halfway in, I'd probably just continue watching it.
And so you waste half an hour searching for something to watch, and I still have the Foxtel box, as you go,
just
I'm
get
going to
in.
watch half an hour of that. It doesn't matter where it is. Is it those that set of movies that do it
you can go into it.
I love that.
Just on Inception, have you seen, I'm sure you've seen Shutter Island with Leo? Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio. So that's the one where he goes to the mental institution as a...
Yes.
Yeah, it's really good. I reckon rehash on that one.
Yep.
And then the other one was Tenet.
Yeah.
Did you like Tenet?
I did.
That's hard to even sort of...
I
think I know about it.
So I've seen it 3 times and I'm still not absolutely sure. I feel like he overreached a fraction.
A little bit.
That, but I didn't mind the overreach. I just don't think it was as good as Inception. And then I think he was just... What he did with Oppenheimer was magnificent. But yeah, I'm not anti-Tenet. I just... If it's the choice of Tenet or Inception, I'm watching Inception.
Yeah, that's fair. No, it's completely fair. I think that it's... Tenet's like Inception on steroids. It went a bit far, but I still don't really know what happened, but I liked it. Now it is goodbye. Thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate it. And obviously absolutely killing it, mate. So I really appreciate your time.
Great to be part of it.
Thank you.